More of the same. Why more of the same? More of the same because as I get to listening to more Jordan B. Peterson, the more ground I realize he's covered in terms of his metaphors of media, the morals of media, how it is he's connecting uh, the mythos with the logos, with the theos, with pragmatism, with advice on how to conduct our lives based on the Jungian read of the shared subconscious. I kind of like it. I kind of like it, but doesn't fucking justify his lack. His A, once again, scapegoating of Derrida, B, the ground, the foundation, which he believes is the bedrock of the West, where liberals, radicals, leftists want an expanse, a covalent expanse of consideration in preparation of future technologies, future genetics, future money systems, future engagement with electronics, the philosophical wars that are coming up. While Jordan B. Peterson is conventionally trying to restrict things in a manner of the traditional 17th to mid 20th century catalog of mores. Then the wobblies of the 60s come out, the advent of lowbrow surrealism really comes on the market. This is all pre-digital, pre-internet times. The whole, dose and drop out, Timothy Leary, everything that generated from that little liberal bounce of access of the West to a more robust and broadening form of what it means to be human than merely the mythological canons that he thinks that people like Derrida are trying to undermine. And really, it's an expanse. And granted, it's a margin. It's like golfing from the rough, but some people golf from the rough, right? And they also deserve a landscape of difference, if you will, difference, if you won't, right? That will allow new considerations, otherly considerations, defoundational considerations to come into the airwaves, right? So even what I'm going to play now is a bit of a prelude to an argument I've had with other people, right? Let me just back this up a smidgen right there. And I think he's going to bring up pain here. I stopped it right before he brought it up, but I have
on which we agree. I believe, you are very concerned with, let's call it pain, for lack of a better word. And one of the conclusions that I've reached, which is, I think, in keeping with what you just said, because it necessarily involves consciousness. So let's call consciousness a reality. But then I would say that the most undeniable form of consciousness is acute agony, because no one doubts that. Not if you watch them active criteria by which they judge whether or not someone believes something.
Okay, so right there, right, the most the highest proof is acute agony, right? Someone reeling in pain. This not only brings up questions of other people's pain in a solipsistic domain, but we see organisms riling in pain. We experience it echoed in ourselves. The idea, though, right, is that he earlier than that, maybe I have to speed it up more, basically said, hey, you can doubt whether you're happy or not, but you can't really doubt whether you're in pain. He might say that. Let's play it a minute and see if he says.
So people, if people act out something uncontrollably, then I'm convinced that they believe it, regardless of what they think they believe. And I think it's for that reason that so many religious systems start with the same metaphysic, which is life is suffering. That's the ultimate reality. And that's associated.
Okay, so many religions start out with the idea that life is suffering. Oh, really? So many do? Please list those, right? In any case, and then he says life is suffering, right? Like he makes an equivalence between life and suffering instead of saying one is subsetted within the other, as opposed to what his current argument sounds like is it's imbued throughout, which does not make it a totality of the system, but an aspect that seems as if in the broader sense of the term life, not just referencing one's own organism, in its elations and its neutralities and its deficits, is pain, right? So, and maybe, I don't know, let's see. He did this recording, last year. About this time last year. So I think he had his argument with Benatar since then.
Associated with consciousness, certainly. But it's more precise than that, because maybe you can doubt whether you're happy, but it's very difficult to doubt that you're in agony and have that actually work.
Okay, so there's that. So actually, he gave a caveat. He said it's very difficult to doubt whether or not you're in agony, because I thought, based on what I thought he was going to say, I thought he was just going to say, you can't doubt whether or not you're in agony, right? And I thought of a discussion I had about where one meditates themselves out of their pain, or how certain drugs don't deny the bodily aspect, but that your mind is focused elsewhere to the point where if your body is going through a type of neurofiring that if focused upon would yield pain, that you're not really picking it up. It's like being under mental anesthesia, right? Meditative anesthesia, if you will. And I've experienced that as well. So people that want to require absolute borders between pain and sensation, or life and pain, as if they're shored up the same. I definitely think that's problematic, and that analogy carries over to postmodern structures of thinking, or consideration, or reapproach, foldings. To me, it's expansive, like an accordion.
People act as if that's the most real thing. And part of your ethical metaphysics, as far as I can tell, is you take that as bedrock in some sense, and then say, well, whatever we do, we shouldn't go there. And, there's in a way, the way that I think parallels that, except that you posit well-being as the opposite, let's say, of suffering. And this is something I really want to talk to you about, because I think there's a paradox in your thinking. And I could be wrong, but tell me what you think.
Well, let's wait to get there, because this is a different topic. I definitely want to get into morality with you.
Okay.
And that's all right for discussion. But this conception of truth, I think we have to nail down, because it just seems to me undeniable that there are facts, whether or not any of us, any existing population of human beings, are aware of those facts. So before they're...
Okay, so he says existing populations of human beings. That doesn't deny that there couldn't be an alien consciousness that is viewing it, but if he wants to metaphysically, secularly ground consciousness itself strictly in, human beings, then he's going to say that there are facts beyond us, which is basically the shared world, right? The shared objective world as a fact, as a referential, even tautological via the senses fact, but it's not that it couldn't be denied. So,
was any understanding of the energy trapped in an atom? The energy was still trapped in the atom, right? And the Trinity test proved that beyond any possibility of doubt. So prior to the bomb going off at Alamogordo, you had some of the world's best physicists not entirely sure what was going to happen. They had an educated guess about what was going to happen. I think there was a betting pool
Right. And so there's an unknown that has to do with hypotheticals about what the embedded properties are, or the possible properties are, of a nuclear process, right? Which would show that there is a world that's embedded, or that we can hypotheticalize within the domain, and that itself is proof of an objective world, and a well described world, if one can figure out what they think are the constituent elements, and manipulate those, so that there's um, other facts, further facts from the fact, right? Like a sui generis fact structure, right? So I'm not trying to reduce things down to solipsism, but my contention is that the facts, minus humans, blur around the edges, because if there's nobody to re-pick up these facts, no intelligent or intelligence, perhaps the fact of automation through computers, even if you say a computer doesn't become sentient, even if it passes, all Turing tests, that type of thing, that there's facts in the world, that would be interesting to presume that those carry on as long as the machines carry on, as long as there's a register of facts. If there's no register of facts, then the aspects of said facts, the roundness of something claimed to be round or spherical, ceases. The relational aspects, the indexing of what distance means, what arc means, what color means, what shape means, what relational distances mean, all of the meanings, other facts, so to speak, fall to the wayside. Some people believe all facts can be known about all things. And then I thought, well, couldn't there always be another fact plus one added to all facts, another greater, robust relationship of facts? Or am I wrong? All right. And that's the argument here.
The question of just how big the detonation would be. And some people who thought that nothing would happen, they would actually fail to initiate a chain reaction. The point is that there was a kind of a probability distribution among the smartest people over the range of possible outcomes there. So this was a linguistically mediated conception of what was true at the level of the very, very small in physical reality. And we got more information once we saw that bright light and mushroom cloud. And now the conversation continues. But it seems to me that a realistic conception of what's going on there, and really the only sane one, if you look long enough at it, is
the only sane one,
that our language didn't put the energy in the atom. It's not because we spoke a certain way about it that determined the character of physical reality. Physical reality has a character whether or not there are apes around to talk about it.
Okay, so look, everything you said there, I agree with it. I guess my one.
Okay, so I'll posit a wedge of disagreement, right? Because he brought up sanity, right? That you would have to, in fact, be insane to believe that the world that one is sensing somehow dissipates in a colorless, textureless, smellless void of form, or just mere data sets, is pointing to the data set, saying that is a data set. It is there. It is there. But is it there? And how is it there? What is the form of data set? Go Wonder Twin Powers form of data set, right? And the twin to the fact is in fact the human ape, right? Or intelligence beyond our intelligence, which you would almost have to be insane, and definitely not atheistic in view, like Sam Harris, in order to concur or agree with the sentiments that I'm suggesting.
Objection to that is is it true enough objection? So, in order to establish an objective fact, we have to parameterize the search. We have to narrow the search. We have to exclude many, many things. And I think sometimes when we do that, we end up generating a truth, and I would say it's a pragmatic truth that works within the confines of the parameters that have been established around the experiment. But then when launched off into the broader world, much of which was excluded from the theorizing, the results can be catastrophic. And I would say that's akin to the problem of there's operationalization, right, where you reduce the phenomena to something that you can discover and discuss scientifically. And then there's generalization back to the real world. And one of the things that you see happen very frequently is that the operationalization succeeds, but the generalization is a catastrophe. That's very frequent.
Right. Like, okay, so Jordan B. Peterson, for example, he does a Lion King thing where he's trying to show the morals and the mores behind the Lion King, and as they relate to human male maturation and his critique of Disney and other things. Now, that's starting with the idea that there is a moral, but then finding it in the structure of the media as a story told, right? And then generalizing backwards from that a form, right? And basically he's saying, well, you wouldn't want to start with the Lion King. You wouldn't want to start your mathematics with a Lion King, or you wouldn't want to build a society based around the Lion King and work backwards on that, because they'd be catastrophic, right? And so by the same virtue, I wouldn't want to, measure distances or temperatures with licorice, if you will, right? Like soft licorice wouldn't be a good measure for these things. So the constraints that we do have that we've already manufactured are built upon strengths. So like for me to wedge a distinction between that which is considered a fact that is and that which is possibly not the case, it's a difficult sale. But in terms of moving people into a more robust considerations about their unique place in the universe, that gap is, I believe, required. Yes.
Be the case with the application of social science theories to the world, because they leave so much out.
Okay, so let's just focus on this claim or this concern about certain forms of knowledge or certain descriptions of the world leading to catastrophe. Now, I completely agree that that's possible, but it doesn't mean what you seem to think it means here. So it's possible for there to be scientifically correct, realistically true conceptions of the world that are bad for us. There are not many examples of that. I think the utility of knowing what's going on is usually so high that it's better to know what's going on. But for instance, the example I occasionally use is there is a right way to synthesize the smallpox virus right now. Is this knowledge good for anyone to have? Well, perhaps at the CDC or in certain labs, we want to have this knowledge because it allows us to develop an inoculation against smallpox. It allows us to understand viral properties in ways that perhaps we wouldn't otherwise. I don't know. I don't do that work. But it seems to me to be objectively dangerous to play around with synthesizing smallpox. And this is not the kind of knowledge you want to.
Well, okay, so the thing is, see, now this is where Sam Harris conflates a point. He's made his point, but then he conflates it when he talks about it more. Right? The problem is more like how to properly contain it, or who has the ethical distribution of the knowledge, provided that the knowledge being true is damaging to somebody, right? So in one way, it's kind of a dumbing down, or it's paradoxical in terms of how to index it, what to call the knowledge of the production of smallpox itself, I imagine is a benign factoid, but as it relates to the maintenance of the human ape or the destruction of the human ape, the hand that bites itself, don't distribute it to other, if the pinky really has a war out with the rest of the hand, don't give that information to the pinky.
Spread it as far and as wide as possible.
Right, exactly. That's the parameterization and the generalization problem. That's precisely it.
Okay, but to point out that this is dangerous, to point out that it would be irresponsible to spread this knowledge, to point out that in the wrong hands this could be catastrophic and in fact could end the human experiment, right? The career of the species. So it could be very anti-Darwinian, to use your framing, in a local sense with respect to Homo sapiens, because this could be the thing that kills all of us, right?
Right.
That's, yes, catastrophic, fine. But
see, Sam Harris's big thing is about raising an eyebrow, believing one can read eyebrows, and then not looking stupid. No matter what he does, he doesn't want to look stupid. Like I think he even got his PhD, completed his PhD, I suspect, just because he wanted, to have a PhD behind his name so he wouldn't look stupid or vulnerable, or that they expose the limits of his own thinking, because most people want to think that they've covered all their bases, but
that doesn't undermine the scientific truth value of.
But it undermines, I agree, but it does undermine the claim that scientific truth is the ultimate truth. That's the claim that it undermines.
No, it doesn't undermine it epistemologically. It undermines it as something you want in your life, right? It undermines it in terms of its value to us as a species. If knowing what is true got you all killed, well, then that would be a truth that wouldn't be worth knowing, but it wouldn't make it less true, right? So if I said,
that's
right. Okay, so he clarifies it, so it wouldn't make it less true. In a metaphoric sense, like, hey, knowing that you're going to hell, and knowing that your decisions are leading you to hell, if you will, it doesn't change the fact that you're going to hell or heaven. Like, oh, this doesn't change, right? If you believe in a mythological binary, in terms of the distribution of one's behavior as it echoes through the moral landscape, God's moral landscape, right? The truth factor would still lie outside of the individual that believes its knowledge set encompasses its destiny, as if it could see itself, something like that.
Okay, so let's imagine for a moment. I understand what you're saying, and I don't see that there's any logical problem with it. But I would say that we're actually starting from different fundamental axioms. Like the fundamental axiom that I'm playing with is something that was basically expressed by Nietzsche, and it's a definition of truth.
To play.
And so I would say, if it doesn't serve life, it's not true. So what we're arguing about is.
But Jordan, I have to pull the brakes there. I mean, I agree morally, ethically, given my concern about the well-being of humanity. I agree with that as a moral starting point. We want to know what is worth knowing. We don't want to know everything, and we certainly don't want to know truths that will get us all killed or make us all.
Okay, so it's interesting because now he's saying no truths, meaning truths as facts, and JB Peterson is clearly stating, like, hey, we're going to say that if it's not good for the goose and it's not good for the gander and it's not good for the whole damn flock, it's not true, because what's fundamental as part of being is that the being continues, and that includes intergenerational procreative practices also. One could argue, or at least for that being to carry on, right? So it's not a type of suicide. If there's suicide involved, then it's not true, because that would be the archer shooting an arrow into the wind and having it strike him or up directly above him where he himself is his own target.
All needlessly miserable. Okay. We want good lives, right?
Okay, so then I would say that by making that proposition, you've accepted the claim.
But no,
scientific endeavor should be nested inside a moral endeavor.
Yes, absolutely, I accept that claim. But
well, then it can't be. Then the moral endeavor can't be grounded in the scientific endeavor.
Then it can't be embedded inside of the other. And here's that distinction of that a set cannot be a subset of itself, right? But can a subset equivalent to something almost of itself have the same set, right? Or can something that's equivalent of the same set house an identical subset? Meaning, and who's to make these adjustments? And that's where Derrida and different perspectives on mathematics and logical structures and the future of logic is substantially going to change, especially when there's virtual reality that is passing the Turing test, where people can't tell whether they're in a manufactured dream or not based on AI's application, and then solipsistic holographic aspects are going to become factually, and using Sam Harris's factually reality based, and then the philosophical consideration will bring people to a spiritual mode, which I believe that I've obtained, where many people have not obtained, that you are already also in the Truman Show, right? You're already within a personal reflective manifold of solipsism and echoes of symbology and a godlike alien conscious capable frame.
Because the inside thing can't ground the outside thing. It's logically not possible.
I would disagree there, but let's talk about that when we talk about morality, because I think that's a great conversation to have. But here we're getting bogged down on the concept of truth. I think you can't have a concept of truth that is subordinate to well-being. you want well-being. I will grant you that. And my definition of well-being is quite expansive, and it just remains to be discovered what in the end will conduce to the greatest flourishing of minds like our own and minds beyond our own. As you say, when we integrate ourselves with our supercomputers, who knows what beauty we'll experience and what meaning will be available to us. I'm interested in all of that, and I want us all to survive, and I don't want to be annihilated by true facts that were dangerous to know. But
okay, but it seems to me then, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me, and believe me, this point I'm pushing is part of the reason that I got to where I got. It's exactly this issue, because I realized that it was necessary for our attitude towards science to be nested in something else, which was a higher moral conception. And if I'm not mistaken, you just made the claim that, if there are scientific things that we could mess with that might destroy us all, it would be better if we didn't.
Okay? Yes.
Okay, the idea that if there was smallpox released upon the planet, that there would not be survivors would already enunciate the anecdote, the antithesis to the notion that something will wipe us all out, right? I'm not saying that it's not the case. I'm just saying if we maintain with the idea of even the smallpox going over the planet, that there would be defenses, and meaning the idea of complete human annihilation is also a metaphysical spiritual idea that's not based in, by remaining conscious, is not based in any reality. Even if I was Will Smith, where I was the last man on the planet, I believed myself to be.
But
by what standard?
We will get there, but they will be no less true. You clearly have to have a conception of facts and truth that is possible to know.
See, so a conception of facts and truth that's possible to know, right? It's the idea becomes exhaustive, right? Like, okay, to say doctors know this kind of knowledge and other people know their kinds of specialties and knowledge. I know painting, I have a knowledge in it. It's exhausted, like to pluralize the word knowledge and say knowledges, right? Pluralize it to say there's pockets of those things that are known that I don't know, and there's things that are unknown that humanity knows are unknown, but they know at least that they're unknown, that type of thing. But it becomes exhaustive to even use the word possible if the set of knowledges, truisms in the future, Google AI taking it, are possible to obtain, meaning that a series of all facts is actually possible to obtain. Sounds like a survey course or like general studies in speculation about knowledges in the future, right? Because supposedly there would also be an infinite amount of dimensionality to attempt to coordinate a non-static universe after that singularity of totality of knowledges that Sam Harris wants. Like, Sam Harris wants to call the alignment of one's referring to the objective world and what's happening in the objective world a fact, right? Which is fine because it's got application, but we're not outside of that application. The perception ability of AI trying to mimic the human as opposed to just gathering data is entirely different, problematic. It's a problem in AI that's being gotten over. It's a hill that we're getting through. But that being said, what the blurring shore of what's called truth and what's called a fact are also disambiguated with Sam Harris, but they're ambiguated with Jordan B. Peterson, because Jordan B. Peterson's trying to draw a kind of truth and then favor that, have a preference for a morally leading, non-suicidal truth, and Sam Harris is busy giving him caveats.
It exceeds what anyone currently knows and exceeds any concern about whether it is useful or compatible with your own survival even to know these truths.
Okay, well then I would say that I don't think that facts are necessarily true. So I don't think that scientific facts, even if they're correct from within the domain that they were generated, I don't think that necessarily makes them true. And I know that I'm gerrymandering the definition of truth, but I'm doing that on purpose because I'm trying to nest truth within the Darwinian framework, which I think is a moral framework. And I think that the logic of your argument about morality is going to push you in the same direction, inevitably.
You're choosing, following Nietzsche here, you're choosing to use the word true. You're choosing to freight it with some moral concerns that will make it very difficult for people to understand what you mean and for you to understand what they mean when you use truth as a synonym for, as you just said, correct. A fact may be correct, but it's not true.
Right.
It seems to me this is counterproductive, and you lose nothing by...
Okay, so this is the problem with Sam Harris, right? You guys can quote me on that, timestamp it if you will. The problem with Sam Harris is that he doesn't want to index different type kinds of truth. He just doesn't want to do it. He repudiates the idea that truth is somehow a multivariable, many different forms of truth could be spoken of, and he has no preference, no sympathy for this, because then it might embroil him in more of a peripheral, orbiting notion of a truth that comes from induction of something metaphysical or mythological or supernatural or unconceivable, or that is more tenuous but robust than his current wanting to maintain a type kind of referential fact-based conditional truth limit.
By granting that the truth value of a proposition can be evaluated whether or not this is a fact worth knowing or whether or not it's dangerous to know.
No, but that's the thing I don't agree with, because I think that that's the kind of conception of what constitutes a fact that doesn't.
Right, and then it comes down because a lot of the modern day logicians want to view logic in terms of propositional logic, and then they sequence it down traditional modalities of how to reduce and concretize grammar within logics, and then speak of variables and the requirements of propositional logic, even to substantial PhD levels. They don't want they don't have a chain that rusts. They don't have a chain that breaks. They don't want it. They don't want a reformulation of propositional logic in a graphic form. That's what I'm trying to produce with my book on contradiction, paradox, ironies, embedded contradiction. Anyway, trying to graph it out a little bit so as to open up the conversation of logic and dispel this kind of weird, narrow-minded disagreement these two chump Hogans are having on the internet, Jordan P. and Sam Harris.
Fact present a moral danger to people, a mortal danger to people, and I also think that that's partly why the scientific endeavor, as it's demolished the traditional underpinnings of our moral systems, has produced an emergent nihilism and hopelessness among people that makes them more susceptible to ideological possession. I think it's a fundamental problem, and I do believe that the highest truths, let's put it that way, the highest.
So that's interesting, because I do kind of agree with that. Like, the more that foundations are in fact changed, that a nihilism can set in, especially where when the concepts move roughshod against the natural formations of what we consider traditionally naturally formulating humans, right? Technology, information, philosophical understanding. There's a need to repress it, bring something back to the conservatives, such as to say, hey, look, your bladder is full. If you feed it anymore, it will burst at the seams, at the top or the bottom or the middle. Your bladder cannot take more. And to make metaphor to one's maturating human, young woman, young man going through social engagements, data sets that were normally formed down traditional lines of maintenance and disclosure, timing to disclosure. You don't want everyone to be a Kwisatz Haderach, Anakin Skywalker 6-year-old building a C-3PO because they just get it, right, while still being a kid, right? It's like there's certain things about our ape that need to be maintained, and so ideas that go beyond that, yes, they're threatening, and yes, Jordan B. Peterson is pointing to a neurological, or not a neurological, but a neurosis towards nihilism, I believe. Meaning he's exemplified that, and yet I don't think that this overarching topic is too much different than the advent of money, or the advent of law structures, or the advent of industries, or of different, all sorts of things over the period of time, in terms of the allowance or the creation of a new technology as it threatens certain conservative values. Even television, radio content, shared content, listening in. People had to peek through peek holes and look through wood in order to see what adults were doing. That's why kids seek things to see things that are scary, or potentially scary to them, that are actually occurring in the world.
Truth. This is going to be long. I'm thinking of that from a Darwinian perspective.
I want to get there with you, because I think that's the center of the bullseye, but we have to nail down some epistemology here. So I will state a few things.
Even some ontology.
Yeah, so I just want to make a few claims.
Okay, so right there, they're mentioning epistemology and ontology, which is a good distinction, right? Because, and yet you even see, like, Sam Harris is going to take on the traditional logicist role when it comes to epistemology. He doesn't believe that these are traversing transparent grounds amongst epistemology, ontology, and phenomenology as the philosophical tripart that's pushed forward lately, contemporaneously.
Which I think are unobjectionable, and I can see whether we're on the same page here. I'm going to probe you from my epistemology to yours. It seems to me that I can make statements about reality, which neither of us can judge to be true. We just don't have the tools, or we're not going to take the time to do it. But we know there is a fact of the matter, whether or not we can get the data in hand. So I could say, for instance, you have an even number of hairs on your body, right? Now, I don't know that that's true, but I know I have a 50% chance of being right about that. And this is not a non-binary possibility. This is a binary one.
Right. Now, okay, so he's gonna now he's gonna use a referent like hairs on the body, and he's going to say this is not a non-binary. This is a binary thing between even and odd. This argument is it's both the appeal and the virtue of referent knowledge to the world of numbers, but it's using, this is the distinction between using like a Newtonian or a number categorization to apply to the world of things, when in fact the idea of measuring what, then if he says, well, this is a fact, whether you have an even or odd number, then is he assuming that me is somehow in a snapshot mode? All of a sudden my body is time stamped and sliced? And if so, because if it's not, then by the time he's done counting all the hairs on my body, even, to find out if it's even or odd number, I will have probably lost a hair, or a new hair would have started sprouting, because I'm a verbose form, right? So logics require static positions in the manner that Sam Harris is approaching them. But when they're talking about things that are in verbose form, which humanity and life and the empirical world appear to be, especially organisms, when speaking about a hair, what could possibly, when does a hair just become fuzz and no longer a hair? When is a cuticle, when it sprouts out of the primary dermis or the secondary dermis? Like, what's the scaling of this idea of guaranteeing that one thing is even and one thing is odd? It's simply not the case that it is. You could scramble process within the attempt to find this non-binary even or odd truth, right? Somebody even brought up gumballs. Oh, there's gumballs in this bag. And I thought, well, what about those gumballs that have like a micro gumball on them, like they're a hybrid gumball, like a gumball with a tiny baby's head on its shoulder, you know what I mean? Like, or it has a little bump. Like, how big does that other bump have to be before it's considered another gumball? And then if it is another gumball, do you cut it off? And then does it qualify? Like, Pluto's too small to be a planet, we're going to exclude it now. Now we want to include it. So how big does a gumball have to be before it's not, just a clump of dust and it's actually a gumball? And then does that matter in the counting whether or not it's even or odd? Because who the fuck knows, right? Oh, the gumball broke. Oh, well, how many gumballs broken are there? There's a certain degree of agnosticism, but then there's just a certain degree of definition that is problematic when you're taking a Platonic numerical form and demanding that it's attributed to something in the actual world, right? And yet we test case for this, right? It's like hanging chads on the the Bush Gore vote of 2000.
Assuming you have any hair on your body.
I'm not going to tell you either.
Yeah. So presumably you don't know this about yourself. I don't want to envision what it would take to know that about oneself all the time. And in any case, it's susceptible to change. Now, what do you think about that? We don't know whether you have an even or odd number of hairs on your body.
Well, I would agree with that, but I would say that the reason for that is that the definition of truth that you're using to make that statement true is nested inside the question itself. And I'll accept the definition and the question for the sake of pursuing that.
We're outside of any kind of Darwinian imperative here. There's no reason to know this. You wouldn't be better off knowing this one way or another. You can do nothing with this knowledge. This is one reason you wouldn't seek the knowledge. But
right, but it won't hurt or kill me.
And it's no less true.
Me inside the Darwinian framework, and so I'm willing to go along with it.
Okay, but let's say it could hurt or kill you. Let's say that now you're a hostage, and
see, and then he keeps saying, but it is true, right? Even the way he accents the word true, like everyone on a truth quest. Hey, this is what's true, right? Now his stating once again that the fact of whether it's even or odd is a truth, right? And mine is not that they don't know. Mine is that the consideration of what it is that they believe that they're counting. There is no landscape or demographic to adhere to and to be definitive about in order to even claim true. Look, it's true. Right, that's the problem with quests of truth or non-indexings of truth.
Your hostage takers have a bizarre religion of their own invention where they will kill people who have odd numbers of hairs on their body, and they will venerate people who have even numbers of hairs. So now your life depends on which is true about you. And perhaps if you have an even number of hairs, you want to find out. If you have an odd number, you don't, or you find out only to then surreptitiously pluck one so that you can be now a safe member of this moral emergency. So nothing has changed with respect to truth value about the claims we might make about the hair on your body, right? It's just a different situation. Your concept of truth can't be hostage to these superficial changes in context.
I think it's inevitably hostage to them. I don't think you can help it be hostage to them. I think that even the choice of what you're interested in as a scientist is subject to contextual factors that are part of the parameters within which you ask the question.
Jordan, what does that mean in this context? So I'm talking again. This is
okay. So I really appreciate Peterson's sentiment against that, but I think he was just going with the flow of saying that it was hostage to, but I wouldn't say that truth is hostage to that truth is hostage to context. They imbue upon one another. They're not one is not one may subsume the other and vice versa. But for the most part, it's like transparent overlays of intersection, or saying shared domain, right? Shared domain, not one's succumbing or beyond, that you're not holding hostage true to context. That in other ways, the context of life is kind of what Jordan B. Peterson is saying. The context of life is bigger than the ape's definition of what truth is. But the struggle of which one punctuates in which direction and affords the focus of our minds, the phenomenological aspect of our consciousness, is what they're debating here.
It's a bizarre example that it may seem strange to talk about for any length, but I think it reveals, at the very least, an awkward commitment to revising our language.
I think what it means technically is that the only final way of sorting out whether a scientific claim is sufficiently true is through Darwinian means. Because I think that the Darwinian process is the only way of adjudicating truth. Now, you don't accept that, and that's fine. I mean, it's not like what you're doing isn't coherent.
I'm just confused at this point. It's not that I don't accept it. It's just I don't see how you can accept what you sound like you want to accept here. So you just agreed that if I were to assert that you have an even number of hairs on your body, I would be making a truth claim, which, one, I'm clearly not qualified to make, but it's basically a coin toss bet. It's analogous to my saying, the coin you just flipped and haven't revealed to me came up heads. It's an importantly similar claim to that. If I'm a rational person, it's a truth that I would assert only probabilistically. I have a 50% confidence that I'm right here. I will not be surprised to be right, and I won't be surprised to be wrong. And it seems to me that you're now claiming that this changes totally if someone comes into your office with a gun and says, I'm going to kill you if the coin came up heads, or I'm going to kill you if you have an odd number of hairs on your body.
No, what changes there is that in the one situation, it's a really stupid game to be playing. And I'm not being what would you call it?
facetious,
dismissive making that argument. It's like, see, what you're doing is that you're taking a way of looking at the world, and you're making a micro example out of it, and you're saying that within the context of that micro example, truth is not malleable by situation. It's like, okay, I buy it. But the problem is that micro example isn't separate in the actual world from the macro examples, which would be, let's call it the scientific method as such. And there may be local applications of the scientific method where the local facts generated are sufficiently, context independent so that you can't make any contextual claims. But I could say, well,
see, and the irony of Jordan B. Peterson, and this is why I think he's a dick, right, is that he's using what I think is a sophistication of maneuvering his considerations over these topics that he did in fact learn from postmodernist authors. He even lauds them on their intelligence, but then just pisses on them, right? And I went to his reading list. And of course, he doesn't mention Derrida on the reading list. He won't quote Derrida line and page, right? Just generally topically doing that. But I think he's using it as a non-disclosed thief, right? So people will seek out, well, how does this miser understand these things while kicking away? It's like he's trying to, like, hey, look, I read Derrida, I went down that cave, I came out, I covered up the blast, and look, there's nothing to see there except for look at how amazing I am. That kind of shit.
Well, it turned out in 1,000 years that entire empirical gain was fatal. And so then I would say, well, the micro parts of it were fatal too. You just couldn't see it.
I agree about the non-utility of playing fatal games, right? So we don't want to play games that will get us all killed reliably. Certainly if there's no huge benefit on.
And then he wants, see, and then Jordan B. Peterson wants to say, well, in the end, if it wasn't saved, then it was all of these little things too, right? Then he wants to pontificate an absolute totality of being at one point, as if one's own assessment of the totality of their being could even be known to the being. That's
on the
well,
other
from
side.
a scientific perspective, why not?
But then you're just saying that, is there a scientific reason to want to exist or to want your kids to live happy lives as opposed to die in their sleep tonight?
Yes, that is partly what I'm saying, yes.
We can talk about that, but it seems to me we can't just skip over this question of truth because it anchors everything else any other claim we're going to make.
But another thing to do, look, fair enough, and we could argue about it for quite a while. And I think the danger is that we'll sidetrack the entire conversation doing this, and that won't be so useful. So what I would recommend is that we could recognize for the moment that we're starting with different claims of truth.
But I don't think we are. I think you're simply deciding at the end of the day to say that any truths that led us down a path where we suffered unnecessarily or died weren't true.
Right. You have to choose what you mean by true. You have to. And I'm not accepting the same definition of truth that you operate under, and it's partly because I believe that Darwin trumps realism, let's say. I believe that pragmatism trumps realism.
But even the truth of Darwinism is not anchored to a Darwinian conception, in your view, of truth. It's anchored to a realistic one. So Darwinism will not prove to be false if knowing about Darwinism gets us all killed. That's entailed in your claim. Darwinism would bite its own tail there and disappear.
Well, not necessarily.
See, and I think, and then Jordan B is going to backstep out of that. But I really like Sam's approach to him now as they wrangle in this particular domain, because I happen to want to favor Sam at this point.
Necessarily, because our conception of Darwinian evolutionary processes could be flawed as well, and probably is. I mean, the recent developments in...
That goes without saying. Yes, we do not have a complete scientific picture of reality, but if evolution is true in any sense, if cosmic rays initiate point mutations in genomes and you get genetic diversity on the basis of that, and things get selected for based on regularities in the environment, and you get speciation, if any of that is true, if DNA has any connection to heritability, right, we have good reason to believe that we are on unusually solid ground there, modulo all of the things we don't yet know about biology. If any of it's true, it's not true in this sense that you are describing Darwinian truth. Let's just stipulate that knowing all that about ourselves, knowing about evolution, knowing about molecular biology, in 25 years, that will allow us, based on perverse social changes that are kindled.
See, this is the issues. I think we just need to index these different types of truth. It's just that on the Jordan B. Peterson end, his type of truth is to wrap humanity's favor in its own self, right? Like, hey, the virtue of the organism, the human ape, is what is tantamount anything that leads us to a destruction or a diffusement into AI or mutation or losing who we claim quote unquote are is a huge threat to the robust context of how it is that Jordan B wants to speak about truth, but he's doing so more from an ontological positioning of oneself as presence relative to their universe sort of sense, where Sam Harris is obviously using the traditional atomization of referent and fact and peer review and common claim notions of truth, and then trying to kick away Jordan's definition as if Jordan's definition doesn't also have legs.
By that self-knowledge and technological breakthroughs, synthetic biology that are empowered by it, we will annihilate ourselves. If Martians came down and had to assess what went on here, the honest description of what happened is we have a species of apes that understood something about evolution, and it was fatal to them. Let's just say that's true. Okay, if that's true on your analysis, we would then have to say that evolution wasn't true.
No, we'd have to say our theory of evolution wasn't true.
But if you then had to look at the ways in which it was false, you wouldn't be able to find any way it was false up until the moment it killed us.
Oh, that's possible. That's possible. And I think you're making a subtle
right.
and useful point. I mean, because you're playing with the idea of nesting again. It's like Darwinian theory nested in a realistic worldview, or is it the other way around? And, you're making the claim that the Darwinian theory is a variant of realism theories. It's a good claim.
But it has to be this way because just imagine two counterfactual situations.
Well, okay, here's a way that it might not be true. It might be that the world of selection, let's call reality that which selects. And so let's say that our scientific theories bear some approximation to a description of that which selects, and that informs our Darwinian theory. Those could all be in sufficient error so that they're fatal. I think, see, when I think of reality, see, you think of reality, I believe, this is what I meant by a Newtonian view. You think of the world of reality like a materialist realist. And I think of reality as that which selects. And those things aren't the same, because the materialist realist description of that which selects is very insufficient. And that insufficiency undermines the accuracy of our Darwinian knowledge. So I guess the only way I can respond to what you said is that I would say that if our knowledge of Darwin, of the evolutionary process, was true, then it wouldn't be fatal. Now that's a strange claim, and I'm not sure that it's true, but I think it might be. I think that because let's say that our theory of the genesis of life and the genesis of the world and all of that became comprehensively accurate. I would say that we would find that would give us a place in the world that would bolster our probability of surviving rather than undermining. And I guess that's partly because, and this is another claim of faith, I suppose, but, when we're starting to mess around with the definition of fact and true, you get down to the place where you have to make axiomatic presuppositions. I would say that reality is not opposed to our existence. I
need to break in here, Jordan, because I just think you're not noticing the price you're paying for redefining a word like truth. And, ironically, it's probably even a steeper price than what these gender pronoun maniacs are attempting to pay, or asking that everyone use their favorite word to describe their identity. Truth is a bedrock conception. It's not just a scientific one. It's a journalistic one. It's an interpersonal one, and it is a...
Okay, good. Well, let's flip to that.
It's that to which our very sanity is anchored, and I think you tug at this anchor at your peril.
Right, definitely. Believe me, I'm perfectly aware of that. It's put me in peril many times, but I would also point out that people were getting along just fine without an empirical conception of the world for millions and millions of years, and animals still manage it. So they're obviously operating on some level of representation of reality that doesn't require articulated empirical investigation.
It's possible to survive without having a clear notion of truth, but it's probably not possible to be reliably understood in a conversation about scientific reality or the relationship between mind and matter or anything else that we're trying to talk about here. And so let me just point out a few things. It seems to me what you're doing here is you are marrying the concept of truth, which is an epistemological one, also to the concept of goodness. And maybe you want to freight it even more with the concept of beauty. You're going to fuse truth and goodness and perhaps even beauty together as this kind of jewel that can't be spoken about in terms of its separate parts because they are fused now. But this creates a few problems. So for instance, if you are going to talk about truth as being inseparable from...
Okay. So and this is where Sam Harris has problems, right? Is because he was saying, look, you're going to marry these other concepts of survivability and beauty and so forth with truth into, and then how Sam, then he says immutable, if it is immutable, right? But the difference between me and Jordan B. Peterson is that the foundations of truth don't just stem from epistemology, they yield into epistemology. They start with pre-epistemological groundings in ontology and within phenomenology, right? And that these are shifting, not static, not crystalline diamond structures of marrying. They're rafts and modules that are mutable at times and static when presenting, a nounus verbus relationship. But I think that's what they're trying to fetter out here, and I think that's really what Sam Harris needs, more of a bottom up approach to what it is he's grounding, because he's so stuck on reiterating the notion of this is epistemology, it's the art of what we know, right? It's not how it is that your group assigning epistemology doesn't have a diffuse boundary itself into pre-lingual ontological states of our human ape.
Goodness, and goodness being a matter of what happens in the end, but we never really reach the end necessarily. We're just moving forward in time. So what happens here is we'll have all of these descriptions of reality and ways of talking about it and things we can do technologically on the basis of this advancement in our conception of things. All of that can be going forward quite nicely. All of it can seem true and beneficial and tending toward the good, but then something happens, which on the basis of what we know and what we perhaps only dimly understand just winds up killing us, right? And then what you now have to do is go back in time and say all of the things we had good reason to believe were true weren't, because of this fatal episode at the end. And then if you had a separate population of people who believed all the same things, but because of some contingent difference in their situation, those truths, now in scare quotes, those truths didn't wind up killing them, but they went on to flourish perfectly by their light.
Well, then I would say that the condition.
Well, and this dialogue could be used in one's personal relationship with whether or not they have offspring, the survivability of their offspring, the survivability of themselves, what it means to maintain good health, the choices of ingredients and nutrition, or how certain people have diets that other people cannot have. And so, but it is interesting. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like the threshing pushback, and I like the interplay between the dialogue. I just think both of them are not being charitable. Jordan B. Peterson is actually more contextual and less analytic, and I think that the dogmatism of logic and science that Sam Harris adheres to is it's becoming dated.
The contingent difference that you're describing would be significant.
It's clearly significant for their survival, but how can it be significant for the truth? I mean, it could be just as...
I don't accept the proposition that a contingent event that wasn't related to definitions of the truth could produce the divergent outcome that you propose.
I just gave you one. I mean,
see, and once again, my argument is part and parcel against the term true, right? Against the idea that we truth quest, that we believe that there is something called the truth, which goes beyond just mere nodding or mere mechanism, or that there's not different indexes of truth. Once again. So it's
granted, it's a cockamamie example, but it's
but that's the problem.
Take my terrorist. We could put you in a situation where knowing something or not knowing something would get you killed, and yet the fact that it would get you killed doesn't reach into the truth value of the statement. If there's someone going around Toronto killing people for not being able to name all the U.S. presidents in sequence, and let's say he's wrong about what the sequence is. So if you give him a sequence that is in fact inaccurate, that is untrue, but it works for him and you survive, it doesn't make it true. Right? I mean, you need a concept of truth that flows through you.
It makes it true enough to survive.
Yes, it makes it used it's a good thing you got the wrong sequence, but
I did tell you at the beginning that I was a pragmatist nested in Darwinism. And I've got one more thing here. You dragged me down this pathway claiming that I'm going to run into all sorts of trouble by conflating truth and beauty and goodness. But you're doing exactly the same thing when you claim that there can be a scientific basis for morality. You're just inverting the causal order. I'm doing it from a pragmatic perspective, and you're doing it from a scientific perspective.
But it's not pragmatic.
Well, I think it is, because I don't think that you can come up with a moral conception that isn't pragmatic. You think you can, but I don't think you can. So, I'm not. It's not like you don't put your arguments forward with power and coherence. They're powerful arguments, and I'm not saying that I'm right.
You are saying that you're right in the sense that you're not persuaded by the argument here. It seems to me that you have to grapple with this, or at the very least, I need to move forward knowing exactly what you're claiming here. And I don't believe that I do. So I just want to come back to this example that I just stumbled upon, which seems to me to get at the issue nicely. If you were in a situation where someone asked you to rattle off the sequence of U.S. presidents, and you rattled it off, swapping the order of a few, But that were the perfect order to keep you alive, because now you're in the hands of some evil genius who himself is confused about the order of U.S. presidents, and he will kill you if your order is divergent from his. Well, then it seems to me that you have to be able to say that that was useful, right? You survived. But in fact, the order you have of U.S. presidents is wrong. It was wrong, but useful. The flip side is also true.
I'm perfectly willing to say that. But I said already that you can set up micro examples where the claim that you're making is valid, but I'm not concerned with the micro examples. I'm concerned with the macro examples, the totality of the theory of fact and truth.
The macro example is no different. So if we take the macro example, where you take all of molecular biology and all of science and all of human history, summating to a moment where some nefarious person synthesizes smallpox on the basis of an accurate understanding of how to do that, not an inaccurate one, right? Accuracy here is just a fudge word
I
for
would say
truth.
that our science was insufficient insofar as it didn't manage to deal with the fact that we have nefarious scientists.
Sure, it's insufficient.
Right, that's a big problem.
Okay, it's a big problem.
You say, oh, that's factually true, and I would say, yeah, it's factually true insofar as it goes, but it wasn't sufficiently true to solve a fatal problem, which would be the problem of the nefarious scientists. So it was deeply flawed, despite.
Okay, truth that is sufficient truth for human flourishing, right? That could be, like a type of indexing, like let's index that and call that case, right? So indexing and facts we have their own interplay, right? So is it true that you're indexing these different facts of these different truths? Well, yes, it's true, and it's not true, right? And at some point, there's going to become a type of they'll call it a paradox, but as much as a contradiction, like that which is converse embeds itself against the other, that which is converse to, and then there's diction that runs along it. Then there will be controversies in song, controversy. There will be a contradiction, and there will be an embedded contradiction. It is that point where the question, where does the shoe fall when you're met with contradiction, embedded contradiction? And in some cases, the answer is the shoe won't fall. If it does fall, then it's an ontological fact of how you claim that it fell or you felt that it fell. I don't know. I think they're just there will be a graphical form of embedded contradiction that we can fetter into and out of.
By its local applicability.
Deeply flawed in its, let's say, the way we used it morally. We didn't know enough to correct for human stupidity.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so we want to know more.
Exactly.
But none of its falsity migrates back to the biology that described smallpox. You can't then say, well...
Sure, I could. I can say, well, you shouldn't have been looking at the biology of smallpox.
Sure.
You should have been solving the problem of nefarious scientists.
Okay, but that's just to say that certain truths weren't worth knowing, or they were dangerous to know, or dangerous in the wrong hands. But what you seem to have been saying, and now I feel like we may be seeing dry land here, what you seem to have been saying, which I think you probably are not saying or don't want to say, is that the conception of truth local to the smallpox virus has to be rewritten there.
Okay, so in my analysis of a lot of what Peterson says, right, is that Peterson recognized a shadow in the universe, a threat that was not necessarily manifest, but manifest in his mind. It's been manifest in defense of mythological or psychological or spiritual, or in his category, narrative stories, and that he's preempting a defense for something that is not the case, and that he's doing so off of a history and practices of engagement with other people's paranoias and other people's issues, right? So he's generated his own shadow demon to prevent humanity from engaging, and he believes this needs to be taught, but he teaches it in terms of practical approaches to life, and then he justifies it on the, well, what happened, like kind of an Occam's razor. What happens if the shadow is coming to get you, and we must thwart it, because the totality is, what he's saying here is we should be paying attention more so to, are there, how do we reduce the number of evil geniuses that will absorb and manufacture smallpox and distribute it to populations, right? Entirely. Anyway, so I think that's what he's doing. I think he's buttressing against a shadow. He's becoming his own artistic creation and expression. He's good old Jordan B is genetically Jordan B. Good thing for lateral transfer and epigenetics.
Because it turned out not to be useful. It turned out to be fatal to us.
Yes, and it's partly because of the narrowness of the. This is what a point I was making with the damn KGB. It's like, yeah, they managed to synthesize Ebola and smallpox, thus demonstrating the scientific truth of their effort. Well, okay, fine, but how about if we take the context into account? Perhaps we're ignorant, even scientifically, but more so morally, in such a profound way that while we go chasing those contingent scientific truths, we miss something really large and obvious, like true or not, generating a hybrid of smallpox and Ebola is, let's call it ill-advised. And so, see, this is the point that I'm making. Is that
but everything turns on that. Let's call it ill-advised. I'm with you there, right? So again, there are things that are not worth knowing. There are things that are dangerous to know. There are things that we'll never know and wish we could know, but we could be surprised about the consequences of knowing them. They could turn out to kill us in the end, right? I mean, so every variant of that is possible to say, which is to say true, but our concept of the truth value of any given statement can't be held hostage to its ultimate result for the survival of the species in the end.
Yes, I think it can. That's where we disagree. I could be sitting in a room in my house and say, well, there's no fire in this room, and the rest of the house could be on fire. And it's factually true that there's no fire in this room, but as a theory, it's a pretty stupid one.
That's just an incomplete and a consequentially incomplete description of your situation. But
that's exactly my point, though. That's exactly my point.
But it was still true to say that there was no fire in your room. The fire was outside your room. It's a truth that doesn't get you anything.
It was true, nested in a larger truth of falsehood. Because the relevant issue is there a fire around that's going to kill me? If I say, well, there's no fire in this room, well, I suppose that's trivially true. But I would say I've certainly adopted a dopey framework of reference within which to ask that question.
So again, this is something we can understand. You were asking the wrong question, or there was a better question to
ask.
That's
the issue. Well, so I would say, look, here's another way of thinking about it. Insufficiently moral people will ask deadly scientific questions.
Sure. Okay, but Jordan, honestly, that is a different topic. I mean, I completely agree. The reason why your conception of truth here is so unhelpful is because you'll continually be buffeted back and forth between good and bad outcomes, and your notion of scientific truth will be rewritten and overwritten and rewritten again in the process needlessly. So again, to take smallpox as an example, the same conception of smallpox, true or not, let's say true to the first approximation, allows us to cure babies who get the disease or stop other babies from getting it, and it also allows us to synthesize it and kill everyone. It's the same description of reality. And so you have to say in the one case, your epistemology requires you to sit around counting dead babies, right?
No, it doesn't. It requires, so let's say, fine, I'm perfectly willing to go along with that particular example. Then I would say, well, that's a very dangerous tool. And then we should bloody well make sure that the people who are wielding it have the wisdom to do so. And so like one of the things that I learned from reading Carl Jung, for example, was that his claim was that we're technological giants and moral infants. And that's a really bad, what would you call it, combination.
Mm-hmm.
And so the moral issue starts to become paramount. And of course, you also believe that to some degree because you're trying to, yes, exactly.
But don't you see how that's a different topic? That's the thing that I just can't get past here. Because if we were to say that smallpox is not a virus, it's a multi-celled organism that's getting people sick, right? That's our conception of it, right? And presumably we would be quite wrong at any point in human history.
See, and that's the thing is my argument would be, no, it's not necessarily a different topic, right? And even the frustration that he's having here, like, hey, that's a topic shift. To me, no, it's an indexing shift on the same topic, meaning it's also a topic shift, right? So it's both a topic shift and it's an indexing problem within the topic, right? So it's, and that's a type of controversy, and it's contradictions that they're trying to figure out here because they want to be on the same page. But I think that kind of motion, that kind of back and forth, to say it's both a different topic and it's a different topic or a different indexing within the topic, is something that Sam Harris just doesn't want to. He doesn't want to swallow this pill. Right. And yet at the same time, I think that Jordan B is just pushing it to the moral end. Once again, he's just absorbed. He's not actually, he's regurgitating other authors, but he's not like synthesizing his own ideas about this. He's just more like combining other people's ideas, but he's not generating anything new. I don't think either of these guys do. That's why I'm having this fucking discussion. It's because I think there's more nuanced and sophisticated minds out there that can jive more with what it is I'm saying, and then I will have to graphically put all this out in in my upcoming book, provided I don't die because of a bad choice, or something, as if it could be my choice, as if
to form that conception, right? But it was certainly possible to have thought that for a good long time. That is, we can make that distinction whether or not we, 100 years from now, annihilate ourselves with a proper understanding of the smallpox virus.
Well, I already admitted, as far as I can tell, that you can make microclaims that.
Okay, but it's all just microclaims until the end of time.
That's not what I'm talking about. No, it's not. It's not at all microclaims, because there's a like the scientific, the materialist realist perspective is a kind of ethic, and it governs how people look at the world. It's a philosophy. It's a massive philosophy. It's a framework of reference. It's not an aggregation of micro events, although it is also that. And I would say that part of the problem with the scientific worldview as it's currently constituted is that it doesn't provide a reliable guide for the development of the kind of wisdom that would allow us to use our technology like grown-ups.
You had me at wisdom. Of course, that is
okay. So
that is
the
true.
Next thing I would say, well, and here's another thing.
It's an enormous problem. But again, that is in my view, that is a change of topic. I mean, I think we should get onto that topic.
Well, it's a change of scale, anyways.
But it's not really, because, so again, this is why I say it's all microclaims. We have all of these microclaims about reality, and this extends to every branch of science and mathematics, but it also extends to just ordinary facts, like the fact that you and I are talking on Skype now. Now, that is true, as far as I can tell. It's the only way I was attempting to talk to you, and I see the Skype logo on my computer. But this is a claim about which I could be right or wrong, and the rightness or wrongness of the claim is not going to be adjudicated by whether or not we survive another million years as a species. And you take the functionally infinite number of microclaims like that, and you carry them forward in time, and you build technology on their basis. And yes, this whole effort can be wisely guided or not, but whether it's wisely guided or not does not change the factual legitimacy of any one of those claims that has preceded your ultimate.
Yes, it might, because it might highlight what they left out. Because like your claim about Skype is a local claim, and as a local claim.
Okay, so it's a local claim, and so once again, it's Jordan B. Peterson trying to reach in, like he defends the artist. The artist, he says, is bringing in something for your consideration, and like so that you're seeing more of the world that you didn't think about, that now you get to think about in this way because the artist brings it in. I believe he has the virtue of an artist. He wants to bring in this idea of the shadow. But once again, I think he's just stealing this virtue from Nietzsche, and then, but he is moving it in. But let's see how this goes.
I would say, as a pragmatist, it's directly the case, but it's also grounded in a metaphysic, and so is the technology. And so,
but Jordan, whether you leave something out, there are all kinds of things we can leave out. First of all, we will always be leaving something out. But second of all, we can leave things out that are worth knowing, that would add to our well-being and survival. We can leave things out that have absolutely no value one way or the other, negative or positive, but are still nonetheless true. And we can leave things out that we should leave out because they would be dangerous to know. Now, we need a concept of truth that allows us to make statements like that. But
I thought maybe someone was fighting outside, but they're not.
Concept of truth is collapsing everything back to whether we survive.
Right.
Presumably whether we survive happily, right?
No, just whether or not we survive.
There are things that are worse than not surviving. We could survive in a way where everyone has a life that's not worth living.
Okay, well, that would be bad too. I would agree.
We could create a kind of prison planet for ourselves where everyone gets tortured as long as possible, even the torturers, and nobody likes it.
Yes, well, I would say that the probability that game would sustain itself for very long is low. It would probably degenerate. Hell, why hell is a bottomless pit, right? It's because no matter how bad it is, you can always make it worse. And so I would say a situation like that would either improve or it would, spiral down to the ultimate end, which would be fatal.
My point is that survival isn't the only value, right? It's certainly not, you could argue it's not even the deepest value. And the moment you form a conception of a life that would be worse than not living at all, it seems to me that you've trumped mere survival. You can easily imagine a situation where you would say of the person you love most in the world that they would be better off dead, right? That, I think, a morally and factually an intelligible claim, given the possibilities of human suffering, and given that there are certain situations where there is no remedy other than death. So even survival as an anchor here seems a somewhat whimsical one, but it's one that, granted, it has direct connection to Darwinian evolution, because the survival of an organism is crucial, at least up to a certain point, is crucial to whether or not it gets its genes into the next generation. But again, I just think it's so obvious that you need to be able to say, you need to be able to use the word true and false and not continually have to dance around this freighted meaning and swap in synonyms like accurate or correct. And you just have to acknowledge that something can be true.
Well, okay, so he's, then, okay, so instead of re-indexing truth or allowing it to wave in, he would like to say, well, that's a value. Like Sam wants to adjudicate, if you will, or lay the cookie cutter framework down and say, look, the topic shift that should be of values as they apply to these truths and truisms, not saying that there's a truth that embodies this value and then punctuatedly bring that to the foreground, right? And so people that favor Harris, I have no problem with that. I'm accustomed to it, as a matter of fact. I like the idea of allowing multiple shorelines of truth or topic or value or indexing or sets and subsets. Like, is the water that makes up a crashing wave above the surface of the ocean not the same water that goes out in the undertow? Obviously, it's both diffuse throughout the undertow and the migration of not just a Gaussian blur of all the atoms that we say make up this wave, but the mist and the refuge and the definition and what you're calling the undertow and what you're calling the overtow and which one encapsulate, which one's strong. Is the undertow stronger than the overtow? Well, by definition, certainly it must be, or it must not be because of X, Y, and Z. But
and dangerous.
I would say it's objectively true as far as our scientific theories are accurate at this time in this local context.
Okay.
And that's as far as I'm willing to go.
That's as
far and you know, there are other reasons for this. Like, I'm perfectly aware of the pit that this produces and all of the complexities that it entails. But I'm not so sure that you're aware, and I don't mean this as an insult by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not so sure that you're aware of the consequences of the rational realist ethic that you're putting forth in your books, because I would say that they produce cognitive complexities that are at least as serious as the ones that you pointed out with my position.
Let's move on there with the proviso that I think we are impressively capable of misunderstanding one another.
Well, we're definitely disagreeing. I think you understand, and I don't think
we are disagreeing. I think you are committed to elevating the concept of truth, or what you imagine to be elevating it, into this kind of the moral stratosphere where it entails goodness.
That is precisely and exactly what I'm doing. There's no doubt about it.
But the problem with that is that then it makes it very difficult to talk about ordinary truth claims and to acknowledge that now you have a situation where your conception of factual accuracy either has to completely break apart from your conception of truth, or it itself is continually vulnerable to changes in human history, which could happen in a million years. When do we finally get to cash this check epistemologically? Let's say we survive for a million years.
I don't know if we ever get to cash it. That's the problem with the Darwinian perspective, is that you're never right. You're only sufficiently right to go ahead.
Okay, but all of those differences in sufficiency matter hugely, right? So if your kid gets sick and you go to the hospital and the doctor says, we have no idea what's wrong with your child, that's one situation, just a stark confession of ignorance, right? Now, for most of human history, there was obviously no hospital to go to. And if you had gone to anyone and said, why is my kid sick? You would get either a stark confession of ignorance or some crazy idea, the utility of which, psychologically we might want to debate, but it would have nothing to do with the biological reality of why your kid was sick. Now, that ignorance, through a lot of hard work, gets overcome in a very piecemeal way and to no one's real satisfaction yet. But there's no question that we have made progress in our conception of human disease. For instance, the germ theory of disease. Knowing something about that has been very useful. Now,
sure, but along with that has come our ability to produce the hydrogen bomb and the birth control pill and all sorts of other things that could easily be fatal.
If somebody writes down a 100-digit number in front of you and it ends in a 1, and they say this number is prime, and what is more, it's the largest prime number any human being has ever consciously beheld, right? That is either true or false, and its truth or falsity has absolutely nothing to do with the ultimate survival of the species or your personal well-being.
I know, that's what you think. I understand that perfectly well, but I don't agree.
But you're non-agree.
So then I'm like, come on, at least agree with that. Come on. But now he doesn't want to agree with that. Like it's so weird that Jordan B would say, well, that's merely a case study when Sam Harris is talking about a mundane fact about the definition of numerology, or not numerology, but of numerical counting systems, which I don't think has to be, meaning I'm okay with Jordan B also pushing back on this, but I think he's going to overinflate this mundane description of whether or not, something is agreed upon to be a mundane truth or not, it has some sort of like tail that winds into whether or not humanity is going to unfold in a perpetual, ongoing, desirous, virtuous sense as he wills it.
Agreement hasn't.
I would say it's sufficiently true for all likely contexts that are to arise in the next while.
Likely.
But the problem is that it's based in a metaphysics that might be fundamentally flawed in a way that we don't know, that would turn out to be extraordinarily dangerous.
Jordan, it could continually change because, again, this check never gets finally cashed unless everyone dies.
I know. Well, that's part of the Darwinian problem.
Imagine riding these waves where the society becomes better and worse and better and worse and then much, much better and then much, much worse, all with this prime number claim running right through it, right? On the upslope, you'll say, oh, it's looking more and more true. It's looking more and more sufficient. And then on the downslope, you'll say, oh, that's fatally flawed. There's a lot we weren't considering.
No, you'd have to draw a causal connection between the two. Like the relationship between that tiny little claim and the total underlying metaphysic is pretty tenuous. And so I'm not going to, act as if a claim about a particular prime number is the causal fact in, rising civilizations up and down. I'm not making that claim. I'm making the claim that there's a metaphysic.
Yeah, okay, he's going to make the claim that there's a metaphysic, but he's also the one drawing a line of when one should have fear and when one should repress and when one should remain conservative. And this is the limit of my bladder before it breaks. Therefore, it's the limit of the best bladder for all of you young kids and people listening. Your bladder certainly can't take one more unit of piss than what I claim it to take.
Physics underneath that claim, and it could well play a causal role in those rises and falls.
But it doesn't play a causal role in adjudicating the question about whether or not that number is prime.
Well, I suppose that's where we get back to some degree to the problem of Rorty and these language game issues. It's like there's some rules that the game of prime numbers follows. We'll call it a game. And according to the rules of the game, that is a reasonable move. And that's kind of how Wittgenstein conceptualized the meaning of words. He thought about those as tools. And so I would say, well, if I accept the underlying claims of the mathematical game in which that's...
Yeah, and I hate his, he's got such a bathroom book cursory approach towards whole authors. Like Derrida did, Wittgenstein did language games, and he considered it a tool, right? And it's like, what 101 class did you take on Wittgenstein? What 101 class or read did you give Derrida, dipshit?
It's a reasonable proposition, then yes, that's true.
It's the only way you can talk about a prime number. And
sure, that's fine. And it might be useful to talk about prime numbers. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're true in the way that I'm defining truth, which you already pointed out is associated with something like wisdom or goodness. Like it might not, it's possible that it's not the sort of game a wise person would play. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case.
That would mean I'm
again,
not
I just
wise.
don't see how that could be relevant. That is a separate claim, which is intelligible to me, and it's perfectly worth talking about. In fact, it's essential to talk about because there's an infinite number of things we could be paying attention to, and some will get us.
That's it. There we go. That's part of the problem. So why are we paying attention to the things that we're paying attention to?
Right.
And that puts you in the moral domain immediately.
Exactly.
Because another question is, why do scientists choose to study the things that they study? And then you might say, well, because it attracts their interest. And then you might say, why? And I would say, now you're back into the dimension of the morality that surrounds science.
But your concern about the misappropriation of human intelligence and science and culture, albeit totally valid and it's a concern I share, that is causing what you're doing with it based on, it sounds like Nietzsche, is causing you to engage in a kind of potlatch with your scientific tools. You are now vitiating the utility of being able to say things like a prime number is prime, whether or not any of us have figured that out. And in fact, whether or not there are people around who even understand the concept of prime numbers.
Well, I would say that's true within a set of implicit axioms. It's true within a set of underlying presuppositions. If you accept the presuppositions, then it's true.
Sure, but
the presuppositions go really, 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 really deep.
Yes, but you have to accept that presupposition whether or not we all die next Tuesday.
No, I don't.
You can't wait around for next Tuesday on the cusp of death to finally make your epistemology indelible.
We do that all the time. There's a scientific theory that everybody says, it's true. It's true. The theory of ether, that's a good one. It's true. It's true. It's true. Didn't account for this. Well, I guess it wasn't true, even though we thought it was all along. That happens all the time.
Of course, but it doesn't happen on the basis of a single variable, which is whether or not enough people survive. I mean, forget about the fact that this Darwinian criterion.
No, we're willing to rewrite the history of what's true based on far less evidence than that. And that's a good thing. But, you say yourself, well, science is always prone to correction by the discovery of errors in the future. So I don't see why that's any more radical than what I'm claiming.
The errors have to be relevant and causally connected to the thing you're talking about. Our mere survival, again, that there are vagaries here, then the question is, as I said before, survival for what? If you're surviving only to be immiserated, we could call that into question. But then there's the question of whether enough people survive, right? So like how many deaths would begin to erode our confidence in the primeness of a given number, right? 500 years ago. You're forced to rewrite our intellectual history based on a single criterion, whether it terminates in bliss or death. that just doesn't make any sense. I mean, we're going around and around on this topic.
I don't really see how that's any different than your claim that science should be nested inside the search for well-being.
Now we will move on to that because I think I know you want to get there, but we just need to plant a flag here. I think many people listening to this, I'll be interested to see if people have a similar reaction here, but I would expect many people will share my frustration that you're not granting what seem to be just fairly obvious and undeniable facts, and now we're having to use this concept of truth in a pretty inconvenient way, right? Because I don't see how anyone's going to think that makes sense. No,
look, fine. Of course, fine. It's going to be controversial. I mean, the claim I'm making is that scientific truth is nested inside moral truth.
Oh, is that the claim he's making, or did he rip out? Is that the claim a previous author made that you're surmising that you're now going to say this is the claim I'm making? Well, it is a fact that you're making it, but you're just a conduit as a rip-off artist for someone else. It's okay. We can plagiarize, I suppose.
And moral truth is the final adjudicator. And your claim is no. Moral truth is nested inside scientific truth, and scientific truth is the final adjudicator. It's like, fine, those are both coherent positions.
But yours actually isn't coherent, because you're then having to, once we get into the fine print, you're having to say, well, of course, all of those micro instances, the billions upon billions of which can be cited, don't get changed based on whether or not we survive. You seem to be having it both ways. I point you to a micro instance, you say, well, that's just a micro instance isolated from everything else. But the moment I connect it to everything else, you seem to suggest that it's going to change. But the mechanism by which it would change, I mean, there is no causal connection between.
Well, let's look at it this way. So let's take the Irish elk as an example. So one of the things that happened to the Irish elk, we think, because he went extinct, was that sexual selection sort of got out of control and the females fixated on antler width, and the poor damn elk ended up with like a 12-foot rack. And that didn't, this is obviously a post hoc theory, but sexual selection can account for runaway transformations like that. And the poor elk got a rack so big that it really wasn't commensurate with his survival. Although then we might say, well, I guess there was something wrong with what the female elk decided to focus on, but we didn't really know that till we went extinct. And I see that as precisely analogous to the point that I'm making right now. We're concentrating on certain things in a certain way, and it's a scientific way, let's say, which is flawed and insufficient, although very powerful. And it needs to be subordinated to something else.
Well, of course.
Must be, or it will be fatal.
I can grant all of that. Again, there's certain ways of paying attention that are dangerous, right? There's certain things that we shouldn't be doing, which we're tempted to do.
Right, and I think one of those things is defining the world as in a materialist, realist terms. I happen to think that. And I have my reasons.
But this clearly, the utility, the pragmatism of behaving in certain ways or spending our time in certain ways or thinking in certain ways has to break free of a conception of whether or not certain things are true. That's the only way you can make a claim that there are certain things that are in fact true that are dangerous to know. There's no way for you to say that. On this Darwinian conception, you would just have to say, well, no, then they're not true. If they're dangerous to know, they're not true. But there's so much that is inconvenient about framing it that way.
Yeah, I know. It's true. Of course there is. There are equal inconveniences with framing it the opposite way. We're not going to get rid of inconveniences. It's like, you're criticizing my perspective. You're doing it quite effectively, although I don't think fatally, because I think my distinction between the micro situation and the metaphysics stands. But I would say that's not exactly the issue. The issue is, can you offer an alternative that has fewer metaphysical problems? And I would say no. I would say that your counterposition produces just as many annoying paradoxes and complexities as my position does.
Certainly that remains to be discovered, but it's, again, this is no doubt a flaw of mine as an interlocutor, but this is the kind of thing that does just drive me nuts. And I just want to make one.
It should.
I want to make one more pass.
Drove me nuts too.
For the philosophers in the audience, I'll make one more pass. Just entertain this example. So you have two labs that are studying the smallpox virus, and they both have the same conception of the smallpox virus in hand. They both are working with the same tools. They've got the same physical tools, the same intellectual tools. One lab weaponizes it and kills 500 people based on some motive that we would obviously want to criticize. And the other lab creates a vaccine and immediately saves the same number of lives. Now, they both have the same description of smallpox rattling around in their brains.
No, they don't, because otherwise one wouldn't have weaponized it. You're expecting me to assume the initial propositions, which is these labs are identical except for the outcome. It's like, no, they're not identical, because the outcome would be identical then. So it's kind of like Joshua Green's moral story.
I can fix this.
See, this is a problem with the idea of like cloning, right? You can clone a cat, right? And the clone doesn't even have the same hair length, same color, same patch marks. It's not like it's a sphinx mixed with a tabby, but cloning animals does not guarantee this like identical outcome. Now here's Jordan Peterson making the problem with with arithmetic as a reference, as a concept, as a Platonic concept of counting, if you will, of singular identity, and projecting it onto the world, and then assuming that if there's an identical in the mind, the principle of identification, like equivalence and identity, have from wiggle room, right? And so he's trying to force feed one upon the other. I gotta plug in my phone. There it is.
Can fix this. Let's not go to green yet. Then the difference between the two labs is not a difference in their motives, right? It's not good people in one lab and the opposite in another. There's just some trivial difference in their equipment or just good and bad luck, which causes one to accidentally let this virus leak out and kill people, and causes the other to successfully produce a vaccine. Whenever you ask members of these labs what smallpox is and what they're trying to do, they say the exact same sentences, but we have a different outcome.
Okay, well, that's a whole different issue, though, because then they're not weaponizing. They just made a mistake.
Yeah, they made a mistake, but they were playing around with smallpox, and it was highly unpragmatic, given the fact that people immediately died. And if the other lab hadn't produced its vaccine, everyone could have died. So here we've got two linked conditions that share the same epistemology. They've got the same truth claims about smallpox. One is inadvertently killing people, highly non-Darwinian, non-pragmatic on your account. The other is saving people, and in fact is the only bulwark against the consequences of the ineptitude in the first lab, right?
Okay, fine. First of all, I don't think it's a very good example because it only involves the death of a few people, but let me counter with a real world example.
No, don't change the example. Scale it up. Let's say they're killing half of humanity, and the other lab is saving, as quickly as they can, the remaining half of humanity.
Okay, well, what would happen?
Give me your conception of truth to describe what's happening here.
See, you're binding it again, and because you say, well, one is exactly the same as the other, except there's a snake in one.
There's a hole in somebody's glove, right? Whatever, you can make it as trivial as you want.
Sure, how about if we make it that the engineers didn't check the damn O-rings carefully enough so the Space Challenger blew up? Okay, so what would happen in a situation like that? Well, what would happen would be that there would be a tremendous investigation into the cause of the error, and there would be moral, part of that investigation would be a moral investigation. Were people being blind? Were they being careless? Were they following proper procedure, etc.? So the first thing that would happen is that people would assume that there were genuine reasons and motivation that might have caused it. Now, they wouldn't have been among the scientists necessarily. They might have been among the equipment suppliers. And so
okay, so as Jordan B. Peterson pulls back in conservative frames, right, politically, politically and philosophically, is a protectionistic racket. I both believe that humanity needs to have slower paces with its inclusion of technology, but technology is coming at faster clips, and access to things, concepts that can be detrimental to young people traditionally have to be absorbed and are absorbed at neckbreak speeds with the modern generation's access to the library of information out there, if you will. Because of this, there will have to be a type of either pulling back, which is a conservative approach of Jordan that he's mentioning. Certain people will need that. They should use that. It'll be a therapy message. Other people will adapt. Their metabolisms will also adapt. Their use of different ingredients, diets, drugs, times, how they're allotting their time, their ability to manage ADHD, anything that has to do with focuses has to be tempered, personally tempered, as they're trying to acquire these vast realms of knowledge and consideration. I think, though, that it is based in a perennial fear. It is based, like anytime humans make a leap into some new technology or way of viewing things, the effects are they're cashed out in the population that survives as opposed to the population that won't. And he's just holding up a warning, do not cross here, like, whoa, stay back, flag. That's how I look at what Jordan B. Peterson is doing. And I'm not moralistically going to be against it. I don't like his method. His message has its place, but going even deeper into the abyss and the realm of what's not known is an interesting art in itself.
We might say, well, maybe that piece of equipment happened to be made by slaves in China and they weren't too concerned with its quality. And so then we might say, well, maybe that throws the whole moral validity of the Chinese system into doubt. And so that little mistake in the lab that you're describing that has this horrible consequence ends up tied up into all sorts of other things.
But it need not be. Grant me the possibility of a little mistake that allows for smallpox to get carried home on somebody's briefcase and spreads an epidemic. It's obvious that this is possible. This is the kind of thing well-intentioned people guard against working in those labs all the time.
Well, then I would say that that was evidence that the moral notion that mucking about with smallpox was a bad idea.
Except in this case, you can't say that, and you certainly can't link bad idea to the epistemological truth value of our understanding of smallpox.
Well, I think you can.
We have the other lab on the other side of the earth, by the only possible method available to us, producing the vaccine that will cancel the negligence of the first lab and save humanity.
A reasonable person would look at that situation and say, well, how about we don't muck about with smallpox anymore? Despite the fact that we got really lucky and the errors and the benefits canceled one another out, it seems to anyone sensible that was pure damn fluke, roughly speaking, and the idea that we should be delving into that particular bit of knowledge is ill-advised. That's what would happen, and that's what I think about that example.
Okay, but it was a fluke in both directions, right?
Sure, but that just shows that messing about with a substance to begin with was ill-conceived. Any logic.
Okay. So a posteriori or a reverse analysis, or I shouldn't say a post a priori analysis that Jordan B. Peterson is using here is a type of fear mongering. Like, hey, there's so many billions of people on the planet, and now he wants to have a moral overlay based on Nietzsche from over 100 years ago, just emerging in the industrial age, having a fear that humans don't have moral wisdom that scopes their technological insights. And I'm going to say that it both does and it doesn't. Like, obviously, the human mind is capable of considering the collateral effects of engaging in any. I mean, shit, if you learn to develop automobiles, then you're contributing to the pollution of the planet, or the use of energy, or something that may have some ill effect. And so how far does Jordan B. Peterson want to wind this clock back, or put up the woe is us, fear those who enter, right? Beware those who enter into the study of smallpox, because the whole process, the whole thing needs to be tossed out, right? The baby is the baby. Let's throw away all the insight and the tech and anything else that might define a context of life or knowledge acquisition beyond just mere animalistic birth. Blah.
Any logical investigator would immediately conclude that. It's like you're saying, well, from a utilitarian perspective, the net consequence was basically zero. So
not that, but again, to say that it was ill-conceived is a perfectly intelligible and defensible thing to say. But that doesn't at all suggest that anyone in either lab was wrong about the physical character of smallpox.
Right.
And we need a conception of truth.
They were wrong in a more profound way. They were right about rearranging the chairs on the Titanic, but they were pretty damn wrong about the fact that it might sink.
Okay, but that has nothing to do with the truth value of any statement about smallpox. It has nothing to do with if someone says, well, is this it?
That's like saying the truth value, whether the Titanic was actually a boat on water, or whether or not it was a spaceship not on water, but people drowned it in water anyway. I mean, I think Jordan B. Peterson's kind of trying to dance his way around this one, because, he's not as fluidly nuanced as I am about the foundational shuffle to get under Sam's goat here. Let's see how this one feathers out. We have, I don't know, 20 more minutes at this speed, probably 15.
Say a retrovirus? We're going to wait.
It does the way that I define truth.
We're going to wait to see if everyone dies or not before we answer that question. We can't think about scientific truth in that sense, again, for many reasons, but certainly because we can't wait around to see if everyone dies to find out if we're making sense in the present.
Sure. The thing is, Sam, we do think about it that way already. We think about it that way all the time. We think, well, messing around with smallpox is probably a bad idea because it might be fatal. Anytime we have any inkling that the outcome of a scientific experiment might be catastrophe on the broadest possible scale, we immediately decide that that's a bad idea.
Of course, but that, again, has nothing to do with epistemology. That has to do with danger and survival.
That's also not true. And I mean, when people were setting off the first atomic bomb, there were scientists that thought it was going to blow up the universe, like blow up the Earth entirely, and yet they were put in a fucking rubber room, or not given any power to stop it, because they were living like, oh no, the sky is falling. It's Chicken Little syndrome. when are people going to realize that the intonation of even the high pitched voice of Jordan B. Peterson is him not managing his relationship with the afterlife? He believes the universe is the shadow, it is falling, and that we need to set up protections against shadows instead of listening to. And which I agree, it's not a denial of the shadow, it's not a denial of what's possibly lurking. The and if he senses it as a real fear, more power to him. Freedom of speech, say what you will. How he's grounding it, I'm more on Harris's side for this discussion.
And risk and things that worry us.
Right, which I would say are higher truths. So it does have something to do with epistemology.
You can call them higher values, but they're not truth in the sense that when it comes time to have an honest conversation about the factual accuracy of any statement, about whether or not something is likely to be true, when you're talking about probabilistic truth, there you're not talking merely about the risk of species annihilation.
I know, that's because you leave that question out of the realm of consideration.
And for good reason.
Well, for good proximal reason, but maybe for bad distal reason.
But for most things we want to talk about, there is no implication of danger on that scale at all. And yet we still have to make strong truth claims. We can make this as prosaic or as weird as you want. If someone says that your wife is cheating on you, presumably that's within the realm of possibility, provided that you have a wife, and you're going to want evidence. And what would constitute evidence? Well, here's evidence. I saw it in a dream. Well, that's bad evidence. Well, here's evidence. I hired a private investigator, and here are 17 pictures of her at various locations with a man you've never seen before, and he looks like Brad Pitt. Now, all of a sudden, presumably you're interested, right? Now, the claim about whether or not she's cheating on you is an intelligible claim. We could drill down on what it might mean. Does she have to be having sex with this person to be cheating on you? Well, let's say yes, she does. Okay, so then there's a claim about what she's actually doing with this person in a locked room somewhere when you're not around. That's a claim that has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not you wind up killing yourself based on your reaction to this unhappy truth. If you then wound up killing yourself, we could say at the end of the day, well, it would be better if he hadn't known that. It would certainly be better if she hadn't done that. It would have been better if he had married a different woman. Surely we would want to say that.
It might be better if he would have paid attention to his damn marriage and to attribute the cause of his demise to the existence of the photographs. This is why I brought up Josh Green, is that investigations into this kind of morality always frame it in such a way.
Jordan, you have to grant one thing here. There's one piece that doesn't get moved here. You cannot move the piece that because you killed yourself, it's not true that she was having an affair. That move is not open to you, and yet you're acting like it is.
Okay, so I believe that Sam's got him pinned here, right? Very, very, very much, but pinned in a civil way, not in a foundational way, right? I just don't think that, and this is my critique of Jordan B. Peterson, why I think he's shucking through these authors and cherry picking them and then trying to make it sound like he's the progenitor of these ideas. He didn't synthesize the idea, right? And I picked up the tripart, phenomenology, ontology, epistemology, grounding, from which to, migrate language or knowledge claims into different categories, both a priori and a posteriori within the traditional epistemological canon. But I'm not certain. Let's see how Jordan P. is going to negotiate this little tactic. I just think it's a stylistic move. Let's see if he gets around it. I don't think they do, but let's see.
Well, I think we've been going down this road for so long that I'm not exactly capable of them at the moment of making the micro example, macro example leap, because you're making a case there that it's sort of quasi-associated with science. That's the photographic evidence and the realism that's associated with that. And then you're making the claim that, it's not true that she wasn't having an affair. I'd have to take that apart more. He killed himself. Like, you're throwing a lot of things into that example that I believe are contextually important to my unpacking the ethics behind it. Because you're equating the fact that she had an affair to him committing suicide, which, there's a whole backstory there. And it also depends to a large degree precisely on what you mean by an affair, which was something that you...
Well, see, and so right, now he's trying to pick it apart, right? Because he wants to agree with Sam that there must be one piece that cannot be moved, meaning all pieces are not moved, like flying birds, right? All birds are in flux. You can see trend lines of these birds in their verbose motion. But in logic, you have to have one piece that is static, that is relative, that is both understood in equivalence and not under scrutiny, right? It doesn't mean that it's not moving, meaning I could write x equals x on my hand statically, but it doesn't mean that the world's not spinning in an orbit and that x equals x didn't travel some 90 miles in the cosmos, right? During the time that I said it, or something to that effect, right? And so the point, though, is that a perception of the nounus to verbus operation in language is the grounding from which Harris is going to make this. And I don't think that Jordan B. Peterson has the sophistication to ground out. So now he's going to scramble through instead of ground out.
Brushed over. So, you're acting. That's the problem with these damn micro examples, is that, and this is why I don't trust Josh Green's work. It's because you set up a narrative that's completely fictional, and you act as if each of the subcomponents of the narrative are isolated truths that have no external context. You say, well, the external context has no bearing on the issue at hand. And that's just generally not.
Well, okay, so and then this becomes an issue with that which is discrete versus that which is diffuse. And once again, it's the postmodernist game to move it into that which is diffuse, which makes Jordan B. Peterson either a blind ironist or a hypocrite. In either way, he's a thief of the postmodernists as he's kicking them away.
True. It has a lot of bearing on the issue at hand.
Well, it bears on some of it, and there's other parts which it obviously can't bear on.
Well,
I'm not just asking that you distinguish those two.
Here's an example, man. I've been in courtrooms lots of times, say, with divorce cases.
Have you been in courtrooms?
The issue of what constitutes an affair, which you brushed over, when you said, well, they depend on what kind of sex is going on, whether or not it's technically an affair. It's like the photographic evidence of her in bed with another man would not necessarily be enough to convict her of having an affair in a court. You're assuming that the photographic evidence is prima facie evidence of the affair. And the way you're doing that is by circumscribing the definition of affair such that it fits with your notion of factual evidence. You might say, well, it's certainly the case that she was having sex with another man.
Jordan, I'm just using it to demonstrate that it doesn't make sense to subordinate our conception of truth or the factual accuracy of any given description of reality to what happens perhaps in some distant future vis-a-vis the survival of anyone. Now, we can talk about the survival of people and of the species as our primary concern. That's a totally valid thing to care about.
Why? Why is it valid? Why is it valid? If it isn't at the top of the hierarchy of truth claims, why the hell would you bother subordinating science to it?
As you point out, there are things that are more important. And
it's like Jordan wants all small truth fact claims to be either part and parcel that which demonstrates the totality of all truth crimes, or he just wants to inflate them to the degree that they are as important as the most robust of human flourishing and virtue claims.
Understanding reality scientifically.
Hey, great. That's exactly my point.
You're not making that point by using this Nietzschean conception of truth. What you're doing is making it very difficult to talk about facts.
It's more of a Darwinian conception of truth than a Nietzschean one. I mean, Nietzsche just referred to it obliquely, but you just admitted that there are...
But the truth is not even a Darwinian conception of truth. It's certainly not a Darwinian conception of Darwinism, because the truth value of a Darwinian description of biology is not predicated on any harms that may come on the basis of people thinking in those terms. That's an additional thing we can be concerned about.
Sure. But there's a claim inside Darwinian thinking, which was recognized by all the pragmatists, who were very, very smart people, that the truth metaphysic nested in Darwinian theory, which is that you don't have access to the truth, even if you think you have. The best you have are the truths that support the probability that you will continue with your existence and the existence of the species. And there is no truth outside that. And you're saying, yes, there is. There's a root.
That is not the pragmatic conception of truth. The pragmatic conception of truth is not merely anchored to the Darwinian logic of evolution and survival.
No, they considered it a subset of pragmatic thinking. As soon as Darwin published his work, the American pragmatists, particularly Dewey, but also William James, jumped on it instantly and said, well, there's an example of the work of the generalizability of our claims about pragmatic truth is even the case in the biological world, and there's no way outside of that. And that's not my invention or my particular interpretation. I mean, that drove an entire.
See, the interesting thing is he won't bring in Freud, right? He'll bring in Darwin. Now, Freud had huge implications across many spectrums and fields of thought, even into the natural sciences, right? In terms of what motivates individual and what grounds people and organisms in reproducible motivations. A whole different spectrum, but it's just so weird that it's like, I don't know. Just the like if and since he's so fond of just saying Wittgenstein says language games or language bits are tools, right? And he just summarizes it that way. Well, I don't think Jordan B. Peterson's toolbox is full enough. Like, can I say that? Can I say that?
The fundamental American philosophy, pragmatism.
Again, I've been very close to pragmatism because I was just endlessly haranguing Richard Rorty in person about these things. But most of what we talk about, most of the statements we want to make about reality that have some truth value or not, however dimly we can see the basis of it or not, most of this content has no obvious connection and may in fact, as a matter of the history of the species, have no actual connection to our survival.
Why do you care about well-being then? Like, to me, you're making two paradoxical moral claims at the same time. On the one hand,
you're wanting to move on to another topic, which is totally understandable at this point. But
well, I think it's partly because when you're talking about the other topic, I think that you will necessarily land up in the position that I just described if you pursue it far enough.
Not if I can't make your position make sense when talking about terrestrial reality or even fictional reality. So I could say, for instance, that in Shakespeare's play Hamlet, Hamlet was the Prince of Denmark. Right now, that is a factually true statement about a fictional world.
You talked about white lies, right?
Jordan, please.
I'm not skipping off the topic. I'm directly addressing it. Something can be true at one level of analysis and not true at another. That happens all the time. That's what a white lie is. It happens all the time. And the reason we're stuck on this discussion is because you won't allow me to make a distinction between provisional factual truths, which I don't want to dispute because it's self-evident that they're correct. But that isn't what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's an underlying metaphysics that's at question here.
There's two different claims you could be making when you call them provisional. One of which is obviously valid and which every sane scientist makes, which is to say that we are working within a set of theories and a set of tools which don't give us ultimate confidence that our current description of reality is true and will never be falsified. We're making falsifiable claims about the world in a Popperian sense, many of which have not yet been falsified and which therefore are still in good standing.
Okay, would you say that one of those falsifiable claims is that the work that we're doing in the lab is beneficial to mankind?
No, you need not make
that. Are you sure? Because that is
Jordan, you need not make that claim. You could make that claim, or you could make the claim that it's harmful, or you could make the claim that it's neither beneficial nor harmful, and yet it's still intelligible in that context to say that what I'm doing in the lab is no less true.
Yeah, but people don't do that. People don't do that in the real world. They always claim that what they're doing is of benefit. And that's because they recognize the fact that whether or not it's of benefit trumps whether or not it's factually true.
Okay, but Jordan, now we've been doing this for 2 hours, and my only claim is that you have to be able to distinguish these variables. It is intelligible to say that in one lab, they have a true theory, factually accurate, which is allowing them to do all kinds of things that they wouldn't be able to do if they were mistaken about what they believe. But they're doing things that are harmful because they're bad people, right? Or negligent people. That is, unfortunately, an all too common situation that we are in.
Then their theory about what they're doing is wrong. You think that you can take their theory of smallpox independently of their nefariousness?
Oh, okay. So, and that this is the distinction: human value as a truth kind, right? Like, hey, if you travel well through time and you hit your targets, then you were true. Oh, he was tried and true over time. And then truth in mundane, logical, scientific forms, which at one point were not that which was mundane. They were that which was unifying and reducting and coming to modern conceptions of logic and form and relationship between ideas, Platonic, independent ideas of the mind, signifieds, which are not reference, which may be reference when you read a graph. This is a depiction, it's a referent, but it's not a graphamine. It's a graph. It's a graph of somebody in form. It's a representation, and it's a graphic. It's like graffiti, if you will, but it's not a graphamine. Or it is a graphamine, but it's not a graphamine within language, different from a phoneme, right? Like a lowest, like a G, a letter G, for example, right? It's not a letter G, right? If there, you could find maybe a letter G. Somebody found a number 9 in here, right? This is the edge of the 9, and so that would be an English-based grapheme. But nevertheless, the idea of a signified, then this preempts the idea that consciousness, then that the phenomenology of the way, let's say, somebody with Asperger's or some hyper precocious individual might actually engage their world of the signifieds, right? Like the one guy who learned Icelandic language in a week, and he can rattle off prime numbers almost indefinitely in his head, because he talks about how in his mind the numbers have a different shape and a color and a light, and he's working on more barrels than other people in terms of his signified. The signified being that the image of the mind. Some people don't even have images of the mind. Some people can lose their inner monologues, right? And so then the domain of phenomenology takes precedence in how one is engaging what it is, their continual universe, and then that takes precedence over then this, like Jordan B. Peterson, the ontology of human existence is a general category, like a sympathetic, empathetic thing to other organisms, a deference away from his own innate mind. And then you take the epistemological realm, which is more of where the traditional notion of knowledge starts its stem from, right? But that also has its problems, because that's only post-lingual human organisms have that, and you still speak of prelingual infants and ascribe knowledge to them, like, oh look, the baby knows what red is, it knows what a tingle is because you shake the rattle and it reaches for it. That's an indicator that it knows, but it's not knowledge in the epistemological sense. Still problems.
And I would say, no, you can't. You can't. Because you're willing, there's an archaeological dig that's going on here. We'll say there's a proximal claim, and then there's a claim underneath that, and then there's a claim underneath that, and then there's a claim underneath that, which might be a moral claim, which I would say is something like at the bottom. And I would say, well, nefarious people can't have a truthful view of smallpox virus. It's not possible. And you might say, well, if you just parse out the little empirical description, it's identical to the empirical description of the benevolent person. And I would say, well, then you're just drawing your borderlines around your truth claim inappropriately. It's a matter of depth.
We could make it even worse for you than that. We could make the lab of good people fundamental.
Or even make it like, hey, Jordan B. Peterson, you're one of the bad people that's trying to fool us into believing that you're one of the good people, and you're propagating your horse shit all over the internet. And so you need people like me to try to dissuade people from following you because you're a jagoff and you're a hypocrite under your own advisement, playing that you're the virtuous one, really being a counterfeit.
Confused about the nature of smallpox, right? So they're good people. We need to be able to talk about their goodness because they have good intentions. But when you actually look at what they believe about smallpox, it's wrong. Wrong by what standard? That standard cannot be their goodness. It can't be the survival of the species. It has to have to do with the details of molecular biology. If you put them in opposition to the lab of bad people who have an accurate, that is true, understanding of smallpox, again, the concept of truth flows free of anyone's intentions here. And it seems to me you have to grant me that.
They just have an error. They just have an error at a different level of the archaeological dig. So they're good people, we'll say, but their proximal definition of smallpox is wrong. And that's also not from the Darwinian perspective. I didn't say that good people necessarily always make good decisions. I never said that, or that being good necessarily provides you with...
Let's make these the perfectly good, wise people who would make good decisions with an accurate understanding of smallpox. It just so happens, however, that they're bad biologists. Again, the crucial thing is that you need the conceptual tools to be able to make these distinctions.
Okay, then I would say that the probability that they're perfectly good people and they're biologists and they're studying smallpox is so negligible that the example doesn't make sense. And this is the problem I have with these toy moral conundrums, is that you get to define the context of the conundrum and leave out what you want. And that makes it easier to win the argument. But they're not real. People win in real world conundrums a lot. And the first problem with a real world conundrum is it's damn near impossible to define it. You have to dig and dig and dig and dig and dig. So you have pictures of your wife having an affair. Okay.
So now he's the orator of what a difficult problem is, as if his stature, right? Because I'm a clinical psych, I'm this age, I'm this mature, because he. Like now he's the orator of what's difficult for other people. Like, come on, you jag off. Other people pick to shit like fucking fish to water, and you're like gonna now tell us, Jordan B., what's difficult? I hope you're using a general stat definition of modern humans as opposed to some like a historic type of like a xenoarchaeology of pre-human brains, and that we'll be able to do intelligence testing on average, and endurance testing for data sets for people that are already died out. I mean, come on.
Okay, so fine, no problem. So then I spend like 2 years digging into the situation, and I find out that to call what she did an affair, given your behavior in the entire 10 years beforehand, is such a perversion of the truth that it makes your photographic evidence not only irrelevant, but positively malevolent. So it's not that easy.
Again, you're seizing upon superficial features of my example that don't actually change the significance of the example, at least from my point of view. Jordan, this is what I'm tempted to do at this point. Because now I'm as a podcast host, I'm worried about the end product here and about the patience of our listeners, a vast number of whom really want us to talk about these things. I think what we should do here is pause. You and I have had a 2-hour plus conversation about epistemology where we seem to differ. I still can't convince myself that when push comes to shove.
See, and now I'm going to have to argue that is not the total relegation of what was being spoke of here, Sam. It's not just epistemology that was being spoke of, And out of the gate, when I started this, you heard Peterson say ontology.
We really have a different conception of truth here. I feel like you are committed to playing a language game by certain rules of your own design here, which are not helping you achieve clarity with an interlocutor like me or anyone else on this topic. It's going to be hard to talk about the connection between scientific truth and moral truth, which I know you want to talk about and I want to talk about, but I'm not going to be as good as I should be going forward if we just start from this place and log another 2 hours. And I know we're not going to have an audience that wants to listen to a 4-hour podcast when we're at the 2-hour mark here. So what do you think about this plan?
What do you think?
We break here. We release this conversation. One thing that will be interesting for me is if anyone can point out to me what I am missing about your argument thus far. Because you are reacting to me like there's something.
Okay, well, I'm trying to do it, Sam. I just mentioned, he mentioned ontology. He's trying to sprout it from a different orientation, his value structure. He's co-opting it. I'm not saying that you're missing it. I'm just saying that you're not hitting it either, right? You're somehow in this traditional hold on what must be, how it is people must engage these knowledge systems, as if that is what is in fact critical for the utilitarian operation of science. And I'm not saying that it's not also that. I'm just saying scientists come at things in various ways. Maybe science is merely the mean average between the wise and the knowledgeable.
You are saying that makes sense that I'm not seeing, that does actually nullify the import of the kinds of toy examples I have been putting forward. And I don't see it. If there can be a Reddit thread that performs a post-mortem on this that shows me how I'm wrong, I would love to see that. I will read it and I will take instruction from it. And I will come back to a second conversation with you, duly chastened and revised how we proceed talking about this. But
yes, well, I might emerge duly chastened as well, but because I think we're differing on something fundamental. But
let's crowdsource this because I'm not following the plot here. If in fact that's true. So with your permission, I recommend we pause here. We release this to our mutual fans. They do a crowdsource post-mortem on it. And then we see where we are.
I think that's a fine idea.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I know there's no sense. Well, we're circling the same territory, and taking aim at the same problem from different angles. And it's the question is obvious to me. It's obvious that we're approaching this from, I would say, almost different ontological perspectives. Now, the possibility is that there's something just flawed with the way that I'm setting up this argument, or there's something flawed with the way that you're setting it up. Although there's nothing incoherent about the way you're setting it up, by no means. Part of it stems on how you're willing to conceptualize truth. And that, well, look, man, it's no wonder we argued about that for 2 hours, because that's a really hard question.
I don't think it's as hard as you're making it out to be. And I think that you'll be surprised if we move into the other topic. I think you are assuming there are implications of my views about grounding morality in science, say, that I think don't exist. So I think you think we're farther apart on questions of morality and value than we probably are. And then you're plowing that assumed difference into this part of the conversation and kind of grappling with it there. I just think it's just not the case. You will find that I have no hesitation at all, for instance, in subordinating the scientific project to questions of what will maximize human flourishing in the end. I mean, if you can show me a line of research that is bad for people, I am going to be no more enthusiastic than you are. But again, we can't reduce the concept of truth to that.
Well, that is the question. That is exactly the question. I don't think that you can make both those claims simultaneously. And you think there's no problem in making them, and that's fine. It's a complex question.
Let's throw ourselves on the mercy of our listeners and
I think that's a fine idea. I really do.
Well, listen, thank you for your time, and despite how wrapped around the axle we got here and how tight.
Right, I think that might, and then they just close without saying much more. I have 4 viewers. Say how you doing. Let me see if anyone's commented in the outside chat. The chatterbox. Let's see if I got that open. What's going on in the chatterbox, people? Let's see. Where am I? Come on. This is the hardest part of YouTube, is just getting to the damn video, because it like puts it in a thingy, and then you gotta hit the thingy, and then it isn't as intuitive as that I want it to be. I want it to be more intuitive than that. Yee. Just trying to get a new page to load. I have so many pages open. It's pretty crazy. Okay, let's see what's up. Let's see what's up, folks. Come on, man. So I'm painting. Keep myself hit. That's the thing. The school of psychology, it's not for rogues like it's. I mean, unfortunately, academics think that they get a wall off the domain of complicated criticism because they don't believe autodidacts or people on the outside read or should have some sort of say in the game unless they're huger. Like Joe Rogan is, he has a philosophy. I wouldn't say he's a philosopher, but people go to him and bounce stuff off of him. And I think he's averaging some things out, but by no means is he necessarily the most optimal to extract and excrete the knowledge sets of other people, or even test them. People are interesting that way. Let me see if I can do that. You guys, I can't even find a link. Let me see what I can do here. See what's going on. If I can actually even see the damn chat. I can't even get to the video I'm recording. Can you believe that? It's taking forever to even try. Okay, where am I here? Let me try Video Manager. Okay. See if it opens. No. So you guys that are seeing this are seeing it on the greater YouTube, but I'm not going to get my own self as a subscription. Right, that's not going to happen. So let's see. Let me try to edit the video, maybe by editing live streaming. I don't know. Who knows, right? Click that. Okay. Anyway, I'm making this more difficult than maybe it needs to be. There should just be a link right there, but let me see if I can say it. I'll put another period in there. Maybe it'll open up a save changes link. Let's see if I can actually get to the video here. Back out or something. Criminy. It's taking forever. Forever to find that. Finally, there's a damn link to my own video. Let's see what anyone's typing, or saying, or doing, or thinking about this, or that, or that, or this. Back out or something. Criminy. It's taking forever. Forever to find that. Finally, there's a damn link to my own video. Let's see what anyone's typing, or saying, or doing, so thinking nothing about this. Nothing's typing, nothing. No one's typing anything. Okay. So I'm going to end it there. Appreciate you guys chiming in. I really wish that I got more actually done on the painting. It's weird. A post-mortem, trying to scale out, trying to launch, if you will, a new criteria of logic that undermines and sets a stage where both these guys can be pillars to a type of thinking, but where neither one of them takes on, they become emblematic of merely traditional roles of structures in the future, and that they're neither of them has what I think the more nuanced or robust considerations and possible philosophies or graphics have yielded. I still have a problem that our internet interface is not three-dimensional as if you're walking into a video game, but that it's two-dimensional, like you're a metaphor for a desktop. Even that's slowly changing. But I think we should have been conditioned to that out of the gate, to be honest. But nevertheless, it is what it is. New structures will develop. I'm hopefully can participate in adding to something that includes, embellishes, and discludes these arguments by both these mental chumps, these C grade chump hogans, doing their chump hogan debacle. Can I say that? Can I act like I'm Mr. Smarty Pants, like I'm Mr. Citizen Kane, and I'll sell no bullshit before it's time. I'll sell no pathologies until it's time, till I have them written. Okay, thanks. Thumbs up, subscribe, be cool, don't be uncool. The gang, be on the gang, we're down.